The morning sun cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor of the Martinez family kitchen, highlighting the stack of unpaid bills that had grown thicker each passing week. Sarah Martinez stood at the sink, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter, staring out at the small backyard where her 3 children played, despite the weight of uncertainty that pressed down on their modest Nashville home. Miguel Martinez had always been the cornerstone of their family, a man whose calloused hands told the story of decades spent in construction, building dreams for others while nurturing his own small corner of the American dream. At 42, he possessed the quiet strength that comes from overcoming adversity, having served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to marry Sarah and start the family they'd both always wanted. "Mama, when is Papa coming home from the hospital?" 8-year-old Isabella asked, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone so young. She clutched a worn teddy bear that Miguel had won for her at the county fair just months before the accident that changed everything. Sarah turned from the sink, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Soon, mija. Papa is getting stronger every day." The words felt hollow in her mouth, especially after yesterday's conversation with Dr. Anderson, who'd explained in gentle but firm terms that Miguel's spinal injury would likely prevent him from ever returning to physical labor. The accident had happened on a Tuesday morning in October. Miguel was working on a high-rise project downtown when a poorly secured beam shifted during a crane operation. In a split second, the man who had survived roadside bombs and firefights found himself pinned beneath steel and concrete, his back fractured in 2 places. The physical pain was excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the emotional weight of knowing he could no longer provide for his family the way he always had. "Mrs. Martinez." The voice came from the front door, accompanied by a gentle knocking that made Sarah's stomach drop. She recognized that particular rhythm. It was the same knock she'd been dreading for weeks. Rebecca Thompson stood on the front porch, her professional demeanor softened by genuine compassion. As a social worker with Metro Davidson County, Rebecca had seen her share of families in crisis, but something about the Martinez case had touched her deeply. Perhaps it was the way Sarah never complained despite the overwhelming circumstances, or how Miguel spoke with such fierce pride about his children, even from his hospital bed. "I'm sorry to bother you so early, Sarah," Rebecca said, accepting the invitation to come inside. The living room was spotless despite their financial struggles, a testament to Sarah's determination to maintain dignity even in the darkest of times. "I wanted to discuss the situation with your housing before things become more complicated." Sarah nodded, gesturing for Rebecca to sit on the faded but well-maintained couch. "The landlord has been patient, but I know his patience is running thin. 3 months behind on rent isn't something you can ignore forever." Rebecca pulled out a manila folder, her expression troubled. "I've been working with various assistance programs, but the reality is harsh. The waiting lists are long, and with Miguel's medical expenses mounting, even if we can find temporary relief, the long-term outlook is challenging." Through the window, they could see 9-year-old Carlos teaching his younger sister Emma, who had just turned 5, how to tie her shoes. The scene was so normal, so beautifully ordinary, that it made the conversation inside feel even more surreal. "There has to be something," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been cleaning houses, but it's not enough. I applied at 3 more places yesterday, but with my schedule at the hospital visiting Miguel." Rebecca reached across and gently squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're doing everything right. Sometimes the system just isn't equipped to handle the speed at which life can change." She paused, looking out at the children. "Have you heard anything from Miguel's union? Sometimes there are emergency hardship funds. They helped with some medical expenses, but they're stretched thin, too. The construction industry has been hit hard this year." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I never imagined we'd be in this situation. Miguel always said we were building towards something better. The irony wasn't lost on either woman. Miguel had spent his career literally building homes and structures that would shelter families, only to find his own family facing homelessness. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the woman in front of her. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm not giving up. There are resources we haven't explored yet, and I have some contacts in the private sector who might be able to help." What Rebecca didn't mention was the strange conversation she'd had the day before with David Richardson, a property lawyer who'd called her office asking about families in need of housing assistance. It was unusual for private attorneys to reach out directly to social services, and something about the call had intrigued her. Meanwhile, across town in a sleek office building on Broadway, David Richardson was having his own moral reckoning. At 38, he'd built a successful practice handling real estate transactions for Nashville's entertainment industry. He was used to confidentiality agreements and unusual requests from his high-profile clients. But the conversation he'd had last week was unlike anything in his 15-year career. The client had been specific. Find a family in genuine need, preferably with children, facing housing insecurity through no fault of their own. The assistance would be substantial. A fully paid home, property taxes covered for 5 years, and enough in a trust fund to ensure stability. The only requirement was complete anonymity. David stared at the property listing on his computer screen. A beautiful 4-bedroom home in a safe Nashville neighborhood, recently appraised at $1 million. The house had been purchased outright by his client just days after their conversation, with the explicit instruction that it be gifted to a deserving family. Mr. Richardson, his assistant, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on his office door. "I have Rebecca Thompson from Metro Social Services on line 2. She's returning your call about housing assistance." David straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed when handling particularly sensitive cases. "Put her through, please." The conversation with Rebecca was careful and professional. David explained that he represented a donor who wished to remain anonymous and was looking to help a family facing housing instability. He provided just enough details to establish legitimacy without revealing the extraordinary nature of the gift. "I'd need to meet with you in person," Rebecca said, her social worker instincts making her cautious about offers that seemed too good to be true. "And I'd need to verify the legitimacy of this assistance through proper channels." "Of course," David replied. "I can provide all necessary documentation. My client's only stipulation is that the recipient family be genuinely in need and that the donor's identity remain completely confidential." After ending the call, David walked to his office window, looking out at the Nashville skyline. In all his years of practice, he'd never handled a case quite like this. The donor's generosity was staggering, but what struck him most was the humility behind it. No publicity, no recognition, just a quiet desire to change someone's life for the better. Back at the Martinez home, Sarah was helping Emma with her afternoon snack when her phone rang. Rebecca's voice carried a note of cautious optimism that Sarah hadn't heard before. "Sarah, something unexpected has come up. I can't provide details over the phone, but I'd like you to come to my office tomorrow morning if possible. It might be good news." Sarah felt her heart skip. Good news had been so scarce lately that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to hope. "Is this about the assistance programs we discussed?" "Something like that," Rebecca said carefully. "Can you be here at 10 a.m.? That evening, Sarah sat by Miguel's hospital bed, holding his hand as he slept. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery, but the reality of his limitations cast a shadow over their future. The physical therapy was progressing slowly, and while Miguel was determined to walk again, The likelihood of returning to construction work was virtually non-existent. "He asked about the rent again today," she whispered to herself, watching the steady rise and fall of her husband's chest. Miguel's pride was both his greatest strength and his heaviest burden. The thought of losing their home was eating away at him almost as much as the physical pain. Isabella appeared in the doorway, having convinced the night nurse to let her peek in. "Mama, is Papa going to be okay?" Sarah pulled her eldest daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Papa is going to be fine, baby. We all are." As she spoke the words, she realized that for the first time in months, she almost believed them. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with that particular quality of autumn light that makes Nashville look like it's been painted in watercolors. Sarah dressed carefully for her meeting with Rebecca, choosing her best blouse and the pearl earrings Miguel had given her on their 5th wedding anniversary. Rebecca's office was in a nondescript government building downtown, but today it felt different, charged with possibility. David Richardson was already there when Sarah arrived. A tall man with kind eyes and the sort of steady presence that inspired confidence. "Sarah," Rebecca began, "I want you to meet David Richardson. He represents a donor who is interested in helping your family." David stood and shook Sarah's hand. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming. I know this situation must seem unusual." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. "Rebecca mentioned that someone wants to help, but I don't understand why. We're not anyone special." "That's exactly why," David said gently. "My client believes that sometimes the most deserving people are those who don't expect help, who are simply doing their best under difficult circumstances." Rebecca opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. "Sarah, I want to show you something, but I need you to sit down first." The photographs showed a beautiful house. Not a mansion, but a substantial family home with a large yard, 4 bedrooms, and the kind of kitchen Sarah had only dreamed about. It was the type of house where children could run and play safely, where a family could build memories without the constant stress of financial insecurity. "I don't understand," Sarah said, looking between Rebecca and David. David leaned forward, his voice gentle but clear. "Mrs. Martinez, my client has purchased this home and would like to give it to your family. Completely. The deed would be transferred to you and Miguel, with no mortgage, no rent, no strings attached." Sarah felt the room spinning. "That's impossible. Things like that don't happen to people like us." "They do today," Rebecca said, reaching across to steady Sarah's hands. "David has provided all the documentation. This is legitimate, Sarah. Someone wants to give your family a fresh start." The tears came then. Months of held-back emotion, fear, and exhaustion pouring out in great, heaving sobs. David quietly handed her a box of tissues, while Rebecca rubbed her back, both of them understanding that sometimes the kindness of strangers can feel overwhelming. "Who?" Sarah managed to ask through her tears. "Who would do something like this?" David's expression remained professionally neutral. "I'm sorry, but my client has requested complete anonymity. What I can tell you is that this person believes in the importance of community, of helping neighbors, and wanted to make a difference in a direct, meaningful way." Sarah stared at the photographs again, trying to process the reality of what was happening. The house looked like something from a magazine. Not ostentatious, but comfortable and warm, with a swing set in the backyard that was perfect for Emma and Carlos. "There's more," David continued. "The property taxes will be covered for the next 5 years, and there's a trust fund being established for the children's education." Rebecca had seen many emotional moments in her career, but this felt different. The generosity was so profound, so unexpected, that it seemed to change the very air in the room. "I need to tell Miguel," Sarah whispered. "I need to tell him right away." "Of course," David said. "Take all the time you need to discuss this as a family. The paperwork can wait until you're ready." As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back to David. "How do I thank someone I'll never meet?" David smiled, and for just a moment, his professional composure slipped, revealing genuine warmth. "By raising your children well, and by passing kindness forward when you're able." The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Sarah kept glancing at the photographs on the passenger seat, half convinced she would wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream. But Rebecca's reassuring presence and David's business card were proof that sometimes miracles do happen. They just come in unexpected packages. Miguel was awake when she arrived, working with his physical therapist on hand exercises. His face lit up when he saw her, but the expression quickly changed to concern when he noticed her red-rimmed eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, his protective instincts still sharp despite his physical limitations. Sarah pulled a chair close to his bed, taking his hands in hers. "Nothing's wrong, mi amor. Something wonderful has happened." As she told him about the morning's meeting, Miguel's expressions cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally, overwhelming emotion. The man who had always provided for his family was struggling to accept that someone else was now providing for them. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Why us? What did we do to deserve this?" "Maybe that's exactly the point," Sarah replied, echoing David's words. "Maybe we don't have to deserve it. Maybe sometimes good things happen just because someone believes they should." Miguel was quiet for a long time, staring at the photographs of their future home. Finally, he looked up at his wife with tears in his eyes. "The children will have their own rooms. And you'll have space for a workshop in the garage when you're ready," Sarah added, knowing how important it would be for Miguel to have a project, something to work on during his recovery. "When can we see it?" Miguel asked, his voice filled with something that had been absent for months. "Hope. David said we can visit anytime we want. It's ours, Miguel. The house is ours." That afternoon, Rebecca helped arrange for Miguel to be transported to the house in a medical van. The entire family made the journey. Sarah, the 3 children, and Miguel in his wheelchair, all crowded together as they drove through Nashville neighborhoods they'd only dreamed of calling home. The house was even more beautiful in person. It sat on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, with a front porch that was perfect for evening conversations, and a backyard that seemed to stretch forever in the eyes of children who had spent months worrying about having any backyard at all. Carlos immediately ran to the swing set, while Emma discovered a small garden area where she could plant flowers. Isabella, ever the thoughtful one, stayed close to her parents, watching their faces as they took in their new reality. "Look, Papa," Isabella said, pointing to a ramp that had been installed at the front entrance. "They made it so you can get in easily." Miguel felt another wave of emotion. Even in their generosity, the mysterious donor had thought about his specific needs, ensuring that the house would be accessible during his recovery. "This is our house?" Emma asked, her 5-year-old mind still processing the concept. "Yes, baby," Sarah said, lifting her youngest daughter. "This is our house." As they explored each room, Sarah couldn't help but notice the thoughtful details. The house was furnished with quality but comfortable pieces. The kitchen was stocked with basics, and each child's room had been prepared with age-appropriate decorations and toys. In the master bedroom, Miguel found something that made him laugh for the first time since the accident. A toolbox, professionally organized and filled with adaptive tools designed for someone with limited mobility. "Our guardian angel thinks of everything," he murmured, running his fingers over tools he could actually use. That evening, as they prepared to return to their old house to pack their belongings, Sarah found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a handwritten note. "Welcome home. This house has been waiting for a family who will fill it with love and laughter. May you find peace, joy, and new beginnings here. The community that has supported you will continue to be here for whatever you need, with deepest respect and warmest wishes for your future. The note was unsigned, but something about the handwriting seemed familiar, though Sarah couldn't place it. Over the next few days, the Martinez family began the process of moving into their new life. Neighbors on the street welcomed them warmly, and several offered to help with the transition. What struck Sarah most was how natural it felt, as if they had always belonged in this place, as if the house had indeed been waiting for them. Miguel's recovery took on new energy, as he had projects to focus on and spaces to adapt to his changing needs. The children thrived, with Carlos excelling in his new school and Isabella joining the neighborhood soccer team. Emma, the most adaptable of them all, declared their new backyard the most beautiful place in the whole world. But even as they settled into their new reality, questions remained. Who was their benefactor? Why had they been chosen? And perhaps most importantly, how could they ever adequately express their gratitude? Sarah found herself studying every interaction with curiosity. Was the cashier at the grocery store involved somehow? What about the friendly man who waved from his yard each morning? In a city known for its music and its generous spirit, anyone could be connected to their mysterious guardian angel. As winter approached and the family prepared for their first Christmas in their new home, Sarah often stood at her kitchen window, watching her children play in the yard and thinking about the chain of events that had brought them here. Somewhere out there was someone who had fundamentally changed their lives, and she didn't even know their name. Little did she know that the truth was both closer and more remarkable than she could have imagined, and that the real story was just beginning to unfold. Spring arrived in Nashville with its characteristic burst of color and life, and the Martinez family had been in their new home for 6 months. The change in their circumstances was remarkable. Miguel was walking with the aid of a cane now, and his spirits had improved dramatically. He'd started a small handyman business, specializing in accessibility modifications for homes, work that felt deeply meaningful given his own journey. Sarah had found steady employment as an office manager for a local pediatric clinic, a job that allowed her to use her organizational skills while maintaining a schedule that worked around the family's needs. The children were thriving in their new schools, and for the first time in years, the Martinez family was building toward the future rather than simply surviving each day. But the question of their benefactor's identity remained a constant source of curiosity, particularly for Sarah, who felt a deep need to properly thank the person who had changed their lives so profoundly. "I've been thinking," she said to Miguel one evening, as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "There has to be a way to find out who helped us." Miguel adjusted his position in the porch swing, his recovery continuing to progress steadily. "Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries," he replied thoughtfully. "Maybe the gift was meant to be about us moving forward, not looking back. But don't you want to know? Don't you feel like we owe them something more than just living well?" Before Miguel could answer, their neighbor Tom Bradford approached from across the street. Tom was a retired music producer who had become something of a mentor to the family, often sharing stories of Nashville's music industry and the generous spirit that defined the community. "Evening, you two," Tom called out, raising a hand in greeting. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" "The best," Sarah replied. "Tom, can I ask you something? In all your years in Nashville, have you ever heard of anything like what happened to us? Someone giving away a house anonymously?" Tom paused, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Nashville's always been a town where people take care of each other. I've seen musicians pass the hat for someone in need, Record labels quietly help artists' families during tough times, but something on the scale of what happened to you. He trailed off, shaking his head. That's extraordinary, even by Nashville standards. Any theories? Miguel asked, genuinely curious. Could be anyone, really, Tom said. We've got folks in this town who grew up with nothing and never forgot where they came from. Country music especially tends to attract people who understand hard times and want to help others avoid them. After Tom headed back to his house, Sarah and Miguel sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The evening air carried the distant sound of music from downtown, a reminder of the creative energy that made Nashville special. Meanwhile, across town, David Richardson was having dinner with his wife Patricia at their favorite restaurant near Music Row. The conversation inevitably turned to work, as it often did. "You've been distracted lately," Patricia observed, cutting into her salmon. "That anonymous donor case still bothering you?" David nodded. "It's not bothering me exactly, but it's unlike anything I've ever handled. The level of generosity is staggering, and the insistence on complete anonymity is absolute. Most donors want some recognition, some tax benefit, some connection to the recipients. This client wants none of that. Any clues about who it might be? Professional ethics prevent me from sharing details, but I can say that whoever it is has the resources to make this kind of gift, and the wisdom to do it in a way that preserves the recipient family's dignity." Patricia smiled at her husband. "You admire them." "I do," David admitted. "In 15 years of practice, I've handled transactions for people buying third homes they'll visit twice a year. But I've never been part of something that fundamentally changes lives the way this has." What David didn't mention was the recent phone call from his mysterious client, inquiring about the Martinez family's adjustment to their new home and asking if there were any additional needs that should be addressed. The level of ongoing concern suggested this wasn't just a one-time charitable impulse, but rather a genuine investment in the family's long-term well-being. At the same time, Rebecca Thompson was reviewing case files in her small apartment. But her mind kept wandering to the Martinez family. Their transformation had been remarkable to witness, but it had also raised questions about systemic issues in her field. If one anonymous donor can change a family's entire trajectory, she mused to herself, what does that say about our social safety net? The question led her to an idea. What if the Martinez case could be used as a model for other interventions? Not necessarily anonymous million-dollar gifts, but strategic, dignity-preserving assistance that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Williams, an investigative journalist with the Nashville scene who had been asking questions about unusual real estate transactions in the area. "Marcus, it's Rebecca Thompson. I know you've been looking into some of the real estate activity around town. I might have something that would interest you, though I need to be careful about confidentiality." Marcus Williams was intrigued. As an investigative journalist, he'd developed a nose for stories that went deeper than surface appearances. And recent real estate records had shown several unusual transactions. High-value properties purchased by shell companies and then transferred to families with no apparent connection to the buyers. "I'm listening," Marcus said, pulling out his notebook. "There's been an extraordinary act of generosity in our community," Rebecca began carefully. "A family in severe crisis received life-changing help from an anonymous donor. I can't share identifying details, but I think there's a story here about the power of strategic philanthropy." "Anonymous donation," Marcus repeated, making notes. "What scale are we talking about?" "Significant enough to completely change a family's trajectory. House, financial security, the works." Marcus felt his journalist instincts kick in. "And you have no idea who the donor is?" "None. The lawyer handling the transaction is bound by confidentiality agreements that are ironclad. After ending the call, Marcus stared at his notes. Anonymous mega donations weren't unheard of, but they were rare enough to warrant investigation. More importantly, if this was part of a pattern, if someone was systematically helping Nashville families in crisis, that was a story worth telling. He began by examining recent property transfers, looking for patterns that might indicate charitable giving. What he found was intriguing. 3 high-value residential properties purchased by limited liability companies and then transferred to families with no apparent means to afford such homes. The Martinez family was one, but there was also the Johnson family, a single mother whose husband had died in military service, leaving her with twin daughters and substantial debt, and the Williams family, whose teenage son was battling leukemia and whose medical bills had forced them into bankruptcy. Each case showed the same pattern: anonymous purchase, followed by transfer to a family in crisis, with legal representation provided by David Richardson. Marcus called David's office, hoping to schedule an interview. "Mr. Richardson, this is Marcus Williams with Nashville Scene. I'm working on a story about anonymous charitable giving in Nashville, and your name has come up in connection with several unusual property transfers." David's response was polite, but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, but I can't comment on any client matters. Attorney-client privilege is absolute, even in cases involving charitable giving." "I understand the confidentiality requirements," Marcus pressed, "but surely you can speak generally about the trend of anonymous giving? This seems to be part of something larger." "I'm sorry, but I can't be of assistance with your story." After hanging up, David immediately called his mysterious client, using the secure number he'd been provided. "We may have a problem," David said, when the familiar voice answered. "A journalist is asking questions about the property transfers." There was a long pause before the response came. "What kind of questions?" "He's noticed a pattern in the transactions and is trying to piece together who's behind them. I've maintained complete confidentiality, but he seems determined to pursue the story." Another pause. "Do you think he'll be able to identify me?" "Not from the legal records. We've structured everything to ensure your privacy. But if he starts interviewing the recipient families, asking the right questions..." "I see." The voice was thoughtful, not panicked. "Let me think about this. In the meantime, continue to maintain confidentiality as we agreed." The call ended, leaving David with an uneasy feeling. He'd grown to respect his mysterious client deeply, and the thought that their generosity might be exposed against their wishes troubled him. Meanwhile, Marcus was beginning his interviews with the recipient families, starting with the Johnsons. Linda Johnson was a gracious woman in her 30s, still grieving her husband's loss, but clearly thriving in her new circumstances. "It still feels like a dream," she told Marcus, as they sat in her spacious living room while her twin daughters played in the backyard. "One day we were facing eviction, and the next, we had a beautiful home and the security to focus on rebuilding our lives." "Did you ever find out who helped you?" Marcus asked. "Never. The lawyer said the donor wanted complete anonymity. We've always wondered, of course, but we respected their wishes." "Any theories? Anyone you might have known who had both the means and the motivation?" Linda shook her head. "That's what makes it so remarkable. It wasn't someone we knew. It was a complete stranger who saw a need and chose to help." Marcus got similar responses from the Williams family. Each recipient was profoundly grateful, completely puzzled about their benefactor's identity, and respectful of the desire for anonymity. It was Sarah Martinez who provided the first real clue. "You know," she said during their interview, "there was something about the whole thing that felt personal. Like whoever helped us really understood what we were going through." "What do you mean?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The house wasn't just expensive. It was thoughtful. There was a ramp for my husband's wheelchair, adaptive tools in the garage, everything we needed. It felt like someone who really understood struggle had chosen every detail. Did you notice anything else unusual? Any other signs that might point to who was helping you? Sarah hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out the welcome note that had been left in their kitchen. This was waiting for us on our first day. I've always felt like the handwriting looked familiar, but I could never place it. Marcus examined the note carefully, particularly the phrasing. The community that has supported you will continue to be here for whatever you need. There was something about those words, community, support, continuity, that suggested someone deeply connected to Nashville's culture of mutual aid. More importantly, the reference to ongoing community support suggested someone who saw themselves as part of that community. After completing his interviews, Marcus returned to his office and began researching Nashville philanthropists, looking for someone with both the means and the motivation to engage in this kind of anonymous giving. The list of possibilities was long. Nashville was home to numerous wealthy individuals in the music, healthcare, and real estate industries. But as Marcus studied each potential donor, he found himself returning to a particular subset: musicians who had achieved massive success but maintained strong connections to working-class communities. One name kept surfacing in his research: Garth Brooks. Brooks was known for his philanthropy, but more importantly, he was famous for his connection to everyday working people, the construction workers, military families, and struggling parents, who made up a significant portion of his fan base. His charitable giving had always been substantial, but it was typically done through established foundations and public channels. Anonymous giving would be unusual for Brooks, but not impossible. And the scale of the donations suggested someone with his level of wealth. Marcus began researching Brooks's connection to Nashville, his property holdings, and his recent activities. What he found was intriguing. Brooks had been unusually quiet about his charitable activities in recent months, and there were gaps in his public schedule that could accommodate the kind of personal involvement that these donations seemed to require. More tellingly, Marcus discovered that Brooks had recently established a new charitable entity, a private foundation with broad giving powers and strict confidentiality requirements. But speculation wasn't evidence. Marcus needed something concrete to connect Brooks to the anonymous donations, and that would require careful investigation and probably a bit of luck. Meanwhile, the Martinez family was preparing for Carlos's 10th birthday party, their first major celebration in their new home. The guest list included school friends, neighbors, and family members. But Sarah found herself wondering if their mysterious benefactor might somehow be connected to their expanding community. "I want to do something special," Sarah told Miguel as they planned the party. "Something to acknowledge how blessed we are." "Like what?" "I don't know exactly, but I feel like we should mark this moment. Not just Carlos's birthday, but how far we've come." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "What about a gratitude tree? We could ask everyone at the party to write something they're grateful for and hang it on that oak tree in the backyard." "I love that idea. And maybe we could include a message for our guardian angel, even though we don't know who they are." As they made their preparations, neither Sarah nor Miguel could have imagined that their search for their benefactor was about to become much more complicated, or that the truth, when it finally emerged, would be both simpler and more extraordinary than anything they could have guessed. The birthday party was scheduled for the following Saturday, and Rebecca Thompson had been invited to attend. She'd become something of a family friend in the months since the donation, checking in regularly and marveling at the transformation she'd witnessed. What none of them knew was that Marcus Williams was close to a breakthrough in his investigation, and that David Richardson was struggling with a crisis of conscience about maintaining his client's anonymity in the face of growing public interest. The truth was still hidden, but the forces that would eventually reveal it were already in motion, gathering strength like storm clouds on the horizon of their new life. The birthday party for Carlos was a joyous affair, with the Martinez's backyard filled with the laughter of children and the warm conversations of adults who had become more than neighbors. They had become a chosen family. The gratitude tree had been Miguel's idea, but it was Sarah who provided the elegant execution, hanging colorful ribbons from the old oak tree where guests could attach their written expressions of thankfulness. Rebecca Thompson arrived early to help with preparations, carrying a beautifully wrapped present and wearing a smile that reflected her genuine affection for the family. Over the months since the donation, she had become more than their social worker. She had become a friend, and witnessing their transformation had restored her faith in the power of strategic intervention. "This is beautiful," Rebecca said, admiring the decorations and the obvious joy radiating from every corner of the celebration. "Look how far you've all come." Sarah was arranging food on the outdoor table, her movements confident and relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during the crisis months of the previous year. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself," she admitted. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure we'd be able to give Carlos any birthday party at all." Miguel emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of fresh lemonade, moving with the careful but determined gait that marked his ongoing recovery. His physical limitations were still present, but they no longer defined him. He had found new purpose in his accessibility consulting work and took evident pride in helping other families navigate challenges similar to what they had faced. "The kids are getting restless," Miguel reported with a grin. "Carlos has been asking every 5 minutes when the guests will arrive." As if summoned by his father's words, Carlos burst through the back door, his face glowing with excitement. At 10 years old, he had grown taller and more confident in their new home, his natural leadership qualities emerging as he made friends in the neighborhood and excelled in his new school. "They're here! They're here!" he announced, pointing toward the front of the house where the first car was pulling into the driveway. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity as children filled the backyard, adults gathered in comfortable clusters, and the house came alive with the kind of celebration that the Martinez family had only dreamed of months earlier. Tom Bradford from across the street brought his guitar and led an impromptu sing-along, while other neighbors contributed food, stories, and the easy camaraderie that defined their street. Marcus Williams arrived fashionably late, having been invited by Rebecca, who thought he might be interested in seeing how well the family was doing. She had mentioned his interest in stories about community support, though she hadn't revealed the specific focus of his investigation. "This is remarkable," Marcus said to Rebecca as they watched the festivities unfold. "You can see how stable and happy they are now." "It's been an incredible transformation," Rebecca agreed. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that anonymous donor hadn't stepped forward. This family was about to lose everything through no fault of their own." Marcus nodded, his journalist's mind automatically cataloging details that might be relevant to his investigation. The house was clearly expensive but not ostentatious. The furnishings were high quality but family-focused, and every adaptation for Miguel's mobility needs had been thoughtfully incorporated. "Have they ever found out who helped them?" he asked casually. "Never. And honestly, I think they've made peace with the mystery. They're more focused on making the most of their second chance." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the party, while also observing the family dynamics. Sarah moved through the gathering with the confidence of someone who was no longer worried about basic security. Miguel engaged with other adults as an equal rather than someone seeking help, and the children displayed the kind of unself-conscious joy that comes from knowing they're truly safe. When it came time for the gratitude tree ceremony, Sarah called for everyone's attention. "Before we have cake," she announced, we want to continue a tradition that Miguel and I started. We'd like everyone to write something they're grateful for and hang it on our oak tree." The response was enthusiastic, with children and adults alike taking colorful paper and markers to compose their messages. Some were simple: good friends, sunny days, birthday cake, while others were more profound. Miguel wrote, "Second chances and new beginnings," while Isabella's note read, "A house where I'm not afraid." But it was Sarah's contribution that caught Marcus's attention. Her note, written in careful script, read, "For our guardian angel, whoever you are, your kindness changed everything. We promise to pass it forward." As Marcus watched Sarah hang her note on the tree, he thought about the handwriting sample he had studied from the welcome letter left in their kitchen. There was something about Sarah's penmanship, neat, deliberate, thoughtful, that made him wonder if she might have more insights about their benefactor than she realized. Meanwhile, across town, David Richardson was facing his own crisis of conscience. The phone call from his mysterious client had been brief but significant. "Mr. Richardson, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the journalist's investigation." "Yes, sir?" "I want you to know that if maintaining my anonymity becomes a burden for you or puts you in a difficult position professionally, I'm prepared to release you from our confidentiality agreement." David was surprised by the offer. "That's not necessary, sir. I gave you my word, and I intend to honor it." "I appreciate that, but I also want you to know that my primary concern has always been the welfare of the recipient families. If my anonymity starts to interfere with their peace or becomes a distraction from their healing, then perhaps it's time to reconsider. Has something changed? Let's just say that I've been thinking about the long-term implications of staying hidden. Sometimes the truth serves people better than mystery, even when the mystery was well-intentioned." After ending the call, David sat in his office contemplating the conversation. In all his months of working with this client, he had never detected any wavering in their commitment to anonymity. The fact that they were now reconsidering suggested either external pressure or an internal shift in perspective. Back at the birthday party, the celebration was winding down with the contented exhaustion that marks a successful gathering. Children were collecting leftover candy and saying goodbye. Adults were exchanging contact information and making plans for future get-togethers. And the Martinez family was surveying their backyard with the satisfaction of hosts who had given their community a memorable afternoon. Marcus lingered after most of the other guests had departed, helping to clean up while continuing his conversation with Rebecca and the family. "You know," Sarah said, as they folded tables and collected decorations, "I've been thinking lately about what we owe to whoever helped us." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Well, they gave us so much more than a house. They gave us stability, dignity, the ability to dream about the future again. I feel like just living well isn't enough. We should be doing something to honor that gift." Miguel nodded in agreement. "Sarah's been talking about ways we could help other families going through what we went through. Maybe volunteering with Rebecca's organization or using my experience with accessibility to help other disabled veterans." "That's beautiful," Marcus said, and he meant it. But as a journalist, he was also struck by the circular nature of their thinking. They wanted to honor their unknown benefactor by helping others, which suggested their benefactor might be someone who valued that kind of pay-it-forward approach to generosity. Rebecca, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly had an idea. "You know, there might be a way to honor your benefactor publicly without violating their privacy." "How?" Sarah asked. "What if we organized a community event focused on anonymous giving and mutual aid? Not trying to identify your specific donor, but celebrating the spirit of what happened to you and encouraging others to participate in similar acts of kindness." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A public event focused on anonymous giving might draw their mysterious benefactor out of hiding, or at least provide an opportunity for further investigation. "I love that idea," Sarah said immediately. "We could call it something like Paying It Forward Nashville and invite people to share stories about unexpected kindness. And maybe," Miguel added, "we could set up some kind of fund to help other families in crisis. Nothing as dramatic as what happened to us, but smaller interventions that could make a real difference." As they discussed the possibilities, Marcus found himself genuinely excited about the concept, while also seeing it as a potential breakthrough in his investigation. If their anonymous donor was someone deeply connected to Nashville's community spirit, an event celebrating that spirit might be irresistible. "I'd be happy to help with publicity," Marcus offered. "This kind of story could really resonate with people." Rebecca looked at him curiously. "I thought you were working on an investigation about anonymous giving. Wouldn't promoting this kind of event conflict with that?" Marcus paused, recognizing that he had reached a point where his professional and personal interests were converging in a way that required careful navigation. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think they might complement each other. I've been investigating what appears to be a pattern of anonymous giving in Nashville, someone helping multiple families in crisis. If we're going to celebrate that kind of generosity, maybe it's time to bring the story into the open." Sarah and Miguel exchanged glances. "You mean you think you know who helped us?" Sarah asked. "I have a theory," Marcus admitted, "but I don't have proof, and I wouldn't want to violate anyone's privacy without being certain." Miguel leaned forward, his expression serious. "If you did find out who it was, what would you do with that information?" It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he didn't have a complete answer. "I suppose that would depend on what they wanted. My job is to tell stories that matter, but I don't want to hurt people who are doing good work." Rebecca, with her social worker's instinct for reading between the lines, sensed there was more to Marcus's investigation than he was revealing. "Marcus, when you say you have a theory, are we talking about someone local? Someone the family might know?" "Possibly," Marcus said carefully. "But I think, before we go any further down this road, I should try to contact this person directly, see if they're willing to talk." The conversation was interrupted by Carlos and Emma running back into the yard, having discovered that some of the birthday decorations were still hanging from trees and wanting to leave them up forever. Their innocent enthusiasm provided a natural end to the more serious discussion. But Marcus left the party with a clear sense of his next steps. Over the following week, Marcus devoted himself to research with renewed intensity. He studied Garth Brooks's charitable history, his connection to working-class causes, and his known associates in Nashville. What emerged was a portrait of someone who had the means, motivation, and local connections to engage in the kind of strategic philanthropy he was investigating. More importantly, Marcus discovered that Brooks had recently purchased a small office building in Nashville through one of his business entities, the same building that housed David Richardson's law practice. It was a tenuous connection, but, combined with the other circumstantial evidence, it suggested a relationship between Brooks and the lawyer handling the anonymous donations. Marcus decided it was time for a direct approach. He contacted Brooks's management company, requesting an interview about philanthropy and community involvement in Nashville. The response came back within 48 hours. Garth Brooks would be happy to discuss his charitable work, but he preferred to keep such conversations focused on his publicly acknowledged foundations and initiatives. It was a polite deflection, but Marcus detected something in the phrasing that suggested his inquiry had struck close to home. Meanwhile, Sarah Martinez was moving forward with plans for the Community Appreciation event, energized by the idea of creating something positive from their experience. She had reached out to local churches, community organizations, and city officials, finding enthusiastic support for an event that would celebrate Nashville's spirit of mutual aid. "We've got the community center reserved for the first Saturday in December," she told Miguel over dinner. Rebecca thinks she can get some of her colleagues to participate, and Tom Bradford offered to organize musical entertainment. "Any word from that journalist, Marcus?" He seemed really interested in helping with publicity. Sarah nodded. "He called yesterday. He's working on some article about anonymous giving in Nashville, and he thinks our event might be a perfect way to conclude his story." What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus's article was becoming much more than a general piece about charitable giving. He was closing in on what he believed was the story behind the story, the identity of Nashville's secret philanthropist. But he was also beginning to understand that revealing that identity might have consequences he hadn't fully considered. The families who had been helped were thriving precisely because they had been able to move forward without the burden of owing thanks to a specific individual. Removing that anonymity might fundamentally change the nature of the gift. As December approached and the community event took shape, Marcus found himself facing the central ethical question of his investigation. Just because he could reveal the truth didn't necessarily mean he should. The answer to that question would ultimately come from an unexpected source and would change not only Marcus's story, but the lives of everyone involved in ways that none of them could have anticipated. 2 weeks before the scheduled community event, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Williams, this is David Richardson. I believe you've been trying to reach my client regarding your investigation into anonymous charitable giving in Nashville." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "Yes, Mr. Richardson, I've been hoping to speak with them." "Well, Mr. Williams, it appears that hope is about to be fulfilled. My client has decided that it's time to tell their story." The meeting was arranged for a quiet Thursday morning at a small cafe near Music Row, far from the tourist bustle of downtown Nashville. Marcus Williams arrived early, his notebook and recorder carefully tucked in his jacket pocket, though he wasn't entirely sure he would need them. After months of investigation and speculation, he was about to come face to face with Nashville's most generous mystery. David Richardson was already seated at a corner table when Marcus walked in, and across from him sat a man whose presence seemed to fill the room despite his casual attire. Jeans, a simple button-down shirt, and a baseball cap that couldn't quite hide one of the most recognizable faces in country music. Garth Brooks stood up as Marcus approached, extending a hand with the kind of genuine warmth that had made him beloved by millions of fans worldwide. "Marcus, right? I'm Garth. Thanks for being patient with all the secrecy. I figured it was time we talked." Marcus shook his hand, momentarily starstruck despite his professional preparation. "Mr. Brooks, I have to say, I suspected it might be you, but I wasn't certain until now." Garth gestured for Marcus to sit down, his demeanor relaxed but thoughtful. "Call me Garth, please. And you were right to be uncertain. I've gone to great lengths to keep this quiet. David here has been a saint about maintaining confidentiality." David Richardson nodded, looking relieved that the burden of secrecy was finally being lifted. "It's been challenging, professionally speaking. I've never handled anything quite like this." Marcus pulled out his notebook, then paused. "Before we begin, I have to ask, why now? Why are you willing to tell this story after going to such lengths to keep it secret?" Garth was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee as he considered the question. "Honestly, because I've been watching these families, the Martinezes, the Johnsons, the Williams family, and I've realized that keeping the secret might be serving my comfort more than their good." "What do you mean?" "Well, these folks have been carrying around this sense of mystery, this feeling that they owe something to someone they can't even thank. That wasn't my intention. I wanted to help them move forward, not saddle them with unexpressed gratitude. Marcus began taking notes, capturing not just Garth's words but the evident sincerity behind them. How did you choose the families you help? It wasn't random, if that's what you're asking. I've got people, friends, colleagues, folks in the community who keep their ears open. When you've been in Nashville as long as I have, you hear about families in trouble, good people facing impossible circumstances through no fault of their own. David leaned forward. What Garth isn't telling you is how personally involved he got in each case. He didn't just write checks. He researched each family, made sure the help was tailored to their specific needs. The ramp at the Martinez house, Marcus said, understanding dawning. The adaptive tools for Miguel. Garth nodded. I've got friends who are veterans, friends who've been injured on job sites. I know what it's like to have your whole identity wrapped up in physical work and then have that taken away. Miguel needed more than just a house. He needed a place where he could rebuild his sense of purpose. And the other families? Linda Johnson's girls needed stability after losing their dad. The Williams family needed to focus on their son's treatment without worrying about basic survival. Each situation was different, but they all had one thing in common. They were good people, caught in circumstances beyond their control. Marcus found himself impressed not just by the generosity, but by the thoughtfulness behind it. This wasn't impulse giving. You really studied each case. That's the thing about having resources, Garth said seriously. You can throw money at problems, or you can invest in solutions. I wanted to make sure what I was doing would actually change their lives, not just provide temporary relief. But why the anonymity? Most philanthropists want some recognition. Garth's expression grew more serious. Because recognition changes the nature of the gift. If these families knew it was me, every time they saw my face on TV or heard my music, they'd be reminded of what they owed me. That's not the kind of relationship I wanted with them. David added, Garth was very specific about that from the beginning. No publicity, no tax benefits beyond the standard charitable deductions, no strings attached whatsoever. Marcus looked up from his notes. So what changed? Why are you willing to go public now? Garth was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested this decision hadn't come easily. I've been thinking about Sarah Martinez's community event, the one she's organizing to celebrate anonymous giving. She's trying to honor something she doesn't fully understand. And there's something wrong about that. These folks deserve to know the whole story, not just the part I was comfortable sharing. There's more to it than that, David said, with the air of someone who had been part of many conversations on this topic. Garth's been struggling with whether staying anonymous was really about protecting the families or protecting himself. Protecting yourself from what? Marcus asked. Garth shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable for the first time since the conversation began. From the expectation that comes with being known for something like this, if word gets out that I've been helping families in crisis, suddenly I'm the guy everyone turns to when there's a problem. And the truth is, I can't help everyone. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. You were worried about creating unrealistic expectations. Exactly. But I've realized that's a selfish concern. These families, Sarah, Miguel, Linda, all of them, they're dealing with real emotions about what happened to them. They feel grateful, but don't know where to direct that gratitude. They want to pay it forward, but don't understand the spirit they're trying to honor. And you think revealing your identity will help with that? I think it will give them context, Garth said. They'll understand that this wasn't some cosmic intervention or random charity. It was a neighbor, someone who understands their community and their struggles, choosing to help because he could. Marcus made more notes, then looked up with a question that had been nagging at him. How did you find out about these families in the first place? The Martinez case, specifically. How did that come to your attention? Garth smiled for the first time since the conversation had turned serious. That's actually a beautiful part of the story. You know Tom Bradford, the retired music producer who lives across from the Martinez family? I met him at the birthday party. Tom's an old friend. He produced some of my early albums back in the day. He mentioned the Martinez situation during a casual conversation, not asking for help, just sharing his concern about good neighbors who were struggling. David picked up the story. That's when Garth called me. He'd been thinking about doing some strategic charitable giving. And Tom's story about the Martinez family seemed like the perfect opportunity. So it really was community connections that made this happen, Marcus said. That's the thing about Nashville, Garth reflected. It's a big city with a small town heart. We take care of each other here, and sometimes that means doing more than bringing a casserole when someone's in trouble. Marcus closed his notebook and looked directly at Garth. What do you want to happen now? How do you want this story to be told? Garth considered the question carefully. I want people to understand that this wasn't about me being some kind of saint. It was about recognizing that when you've been blessed with resources, you have opportunities to make real differences in people's lives. And I want these families to know that they don't owe me anything except the promise to help others when they're able. Will you be attending Sarah's community event? I think I should. She's been working hard to create something meaningful, and she deserves to know the full story behind what inspired it. David looked at both men. There's one more thing we should discuss. Once this story comes out, there will likely be other families who reach out, hoping for similar help. Garth's been thinking about how to handle that. I can't help everyone, Garth said simply. But what I can do is encourage the kind of community-based support that made this possible in the first place. Maybe we can use Sarah's event to launch something more systematic. Not just me helping people, but all of us helping each other. Marcus realized that he had stumbled onto something much larger than a simple story about anonymous charity. This was about the responsibility that comes with resources, the ethics of giving, and the power of community to transform individual acts of kindness into sustainable systems of support. When do you want to tell them? Marcus asked. Soon, Garth said. Before the community event, definitely. They deserve to hear it from me directly, not read about it in your article. I'd like to be there when you tell them, if that's all right. Not as a journalist, but as someone who's been following their story. Garth nodded. I think they'd appreciate that. You've been respectful throughout this investigation, and they should know that someone cared enough to dig deeper into what happened to them. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus had one final question. Any regrets about keeping this secret for so long? Garth thought for a moment. Only one. I wish I could have seen their faces when they first walked into those houses. That moment of joy, of hope being restored. That's what this was really about. David gathered his papers. You'll get to see that joy again when you tell them the truth. They're going to be amazed. And grateful, Marcus added. That's what I'm hoping to avoid, Garth said with a wry smile. But I suppose some conversations are worth having, even when they're uncomfortable. As they walked out of the cafe together, Marcus felt the weight of the story he was about to tell. It wasn't just about a country music superstar's secret philanthropy. It was about the ripple effects of kindness, the complexity of gratitude, and the way individual acts of generosity can inspire entire communities to think differently about caring for one another. The revelation was scheduled for the following Sunday afternoon at the Martinez family home. Garth would tell them first, then the other families, and finally, Marcus would publish the story that would bring Nashville's secret philanthropist into the light. But first, there was the matter of informing Sarah, Miguel, and their children that their guardian angel had a name, a face, and a story that was even more remarkable than the mystery they had been living with for the past year. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp December weather that makes Nashville feel like a postcard. All golden light and the promise of winter's first snow. Sarah Martinez was in her kitchen, preparing refreshments for what Rebecca had described as an important visit from someone who's been following your family's story. Miguel was in the living room with the children, helping Emma with a jigsaw puzzle while Carlos and Isabella worked on homework at the dining room table. The scene was one of comfortable domesticity, a family settled into routines that spoke of security and contentment. When the doorbell rang at exactly 3 o'clock, Sarah dried her hands on a kitchen towel and went to answer it, expecting to see Rebecca and perhaps Marcus Williams, who had mentioned he might stop by. Instead, she found herself face to face with Garth Brooks. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's mind struggled to process why one of country music's biggest stars was standing on her front porch, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing the slightly nervous expression of someone about to deliver important news. "Mrs. Martinez? I'm Garth Brooks. I wonder if we could talk." Sarah's shock was evident, but her natural graciousness took over. "Of course, please come in. We're big fans. But I don't understand." Miguel appeared in the hallway, having heard voices at the door. His expression mirrored his wife's confusion as he recognized their unexpected visitor. "Mr. Brooks, this is unexpected. Are you lost? Can we help you with directions?" Garth smiled at the assumption, appreciating the family's instinct to offer assistance even when they were clearly bewildered. "Actually, I'm exactly where I need to be. I was hoping we could sit down together. I have something important to tell you." Rebecca Thompson and Marcus Williams arrived a few minutes later, having coordinated their timing to allow Garth a few moments alone with the family first. They found the Martinez family and their famous visitors seated in the living room, with Garth clearly in the middle of an explanation that had left everyone speechless. "You're telling us," Sarah said slowly, "that you're the one who... You bought our house?" Garth nodded. "I bought this house, and I arranged for it to be given to your family, along with everything else. The financial security, the trust fund for the children's education, all of it." Miguel was shaking his head in disbelief. "But why? How did you even know about us?" "Your neighbor, Tom Bradford, is an old friend. He mentioned your situation during a conversation, and when I heard about what you were going through, a good man, a veteran, hurt on the job and facing the loss of everything he'd worked for, I knew I wanted to help." Isabella, who had been listening with the intense focus that children bring to adult conversations they don't quite understand, spoke up. "Are you really famous?" Garth laughed, the first genuine moment of levity since the conversation began. "Some people seem to think so, but right now, I'm just a neighbor who was lucky enough to be able to help when you needed it." Carlos, never one to be left out, asked the question that was probably on everyone's mind. "Why didn't you tell us before?" It was a direct question that deserved a direct answer. Garth leaned forward, speaking to Carlos, but addressing the whole family. "Because I wanted you to focus on building your new life, not on feeling like you owed me something. When someone helps you, it should be because they want to, not because they expect something in return." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as the full weight of the revelation settled over her. "All this time, we've been wondering, trying to figure out how to thank someone we'd never met. And you were right here in Nashville all along." "Actually," Rebecca interjected gently, "he's been closer than that. Garth has been following your progress, making sure you had everything you needed." Miguel looked up sharply. "Following our progress?" David Richardson, who had arrived with Rebecca and Marcus but had been quietly observing the reunion, stepped forward. Nothing intrusive, he assured them. But Garth wanted to make sure the gift was truly helping, that there weren't additional needs that should be addressed. The adaptive tools that appeared in the garage, Miguel said with sudden understanding. The ones that showed up a few weeks after we moved in. Garth nodded. I heard through Tom that you were interested in starting a handyman business, but were struggling with tools that worked with your mobility limitations. It seemed like an easy problem to solve. Emma, who had been sitting quietly beside her mother, suddenly got up and walked over to Garth. With the fearless directness of a 5-year-old, she climbed into his lap and looked directly into his eyes. Thank you for our house, she said simply. I love my room. It was Garth's turn to get emotional. He hugged the little girl gently, understanding that her uncomplicated gratitude represented everything he had hoped to achieve. You're very welcome, sweetheart. I'm glad you're happy here. Marcus, who had been documenting the reunion in his mind rather than his notebook, finally spoke up. I hope you don't mind my being here for this. I've been following your story for months, and I wanted to see how it concluded. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked around the room at the assembled group. The famous country singer who had changed their lives, the social worker who had helped them navigate the transition, the journalist who had uncovered the truth, and the lawyer who had made it all possible while maintaining absolute discretion. I still can't believe this is real, she said. Garth Brooks has been our guardian angel all along. Not a guardian angel, Garth corrected gently. Just someone who understands what it's like to struggle and wanted to help when I could. Miguel struggled to his feet, extending his hand to Garth. I don't know how to thank you adequately. You gave us our lives back. Garth shook his hand firmly. You thank me by raising those beautiful children well and by helping other people when you get the chance. That's all I've ever wanted from this. About that, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she processed the revelation. The community event I've been planning, the celebration of anonymous giving. Now that we know who you are, I want to ask if you'd consider being part of it officially. Garth looked uncertain. I'm not sure that's a good idea. This was never supposed to be about publicity for me. Rebecca had been thinking about this possibility since learning of Garth's decision to reveal himself. Actually, I think Sarah's onto something important. Your willingness to step forward could inspire other people to think about strategic giving. Not everyone can do what you did, but many people could do something. Marcus nodded in agreement. The story I'm going to write isn't just about your generosity. It's about what happens when communities take care of each other. Your example could encourage others to find their own ways to help. What did you have in mind? Garth asked Sarah. Well, originally I wanted to create an event that celebrated the spirit of what happened to us without knowing who was behind it. Now that we know it was you, maybe we could use the event to launch something more systematic. A foundation, or a network, or just a way for people to connect families in need with neighbors who want to help. Garth was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful but resolute. You know what? I think that's exactly what should happen. Not because I want recognition, but because what happened to your family shouldn't be random. There are too many good people struggling with circumstances beyond their control. David, ever the lawyer, had practical concerns. If we're going to formalize this in any way, we'll need to think about structure, oversight, sustainability. This kind of thing can grow quickly once it becomes public. What about calling it the Nashville Neighbors Network? Isabella suggested, having followed the conversation with impressive comprehension. That way, it's about all of us helping each other, not just about one person helping other people. The adults in the room looked at the 9-year-old with something approaching amazement. Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, came exactly the right perspective. I love that, Garth said immediately. Nashville Neighbors Network. It captures exactly what this should be about. Over the next hour, they outlined the basics of what would become a model for community-driven charitable assistance. Rather than relying on one wealthy donor, the network would connect families in crisis with multiple forms of community support: financial assistance, professional services, emotional support, and practical help. Garth would provide seed funding and serve as an honorary chairman, but the real work would be done by volunteers like Rebecca, Miguel, who could help with accessibility issues, and Sarah, who had proven gift for organization and outreach. "This feels right," Miguel said, as they discussed the possibilities. "We've been wanting to find a way to honor what you did for us. And maybe this is it, making sure other families don't have to face crisis alone." As the afternoon drew to a close, Garth prepared to leave, but not before spending a few more minutes with each of the children, learning about their interests and their dreams for the future. It was clear that his investment in their family went far beyond financial generosity. He genuinely cared about them as individuals. "Will we see you again?" Carlos asked, as Garth prepared to go. "I hope so," Garth replied. "I'd like to hear how school goes, and maybe Miguel could show me his workshop when he gets it fully set up." "You're always welcome here," Sarah said, and meant it completely. "Your family now, whether you intended to be or not." After Garth left, the Martinez family sat together in their living room, trying to process the day's revelations. The mystery that had defined their new life was solved. But somehow that didn't diminish the miracle of what had happened to them. "I still can't believe Garth Brooks bought our house," Carlos said, shaking his head. "I can't believe we had tea with a famous person," Emma added, having been most impressed by the casual nature of their interaction. Isabella, ever the thoughtful one, had a different perspective. "I'm glad we know who helped us now. It makes it feel more real somehow." Sarah understood what her daughter meant. The anonymous generosity had been overwhelming in its mystery, but knowing it came from a real person, someone who had reasons, motivations, and ongoing concern for their welfare, made the gift feel more human and therefore more sustainable. That evening, Marcus Williams sat in his apartment, beginning to write the story that would introduce Nashville to its secret philanthropist. But as he typed, he realized that the real story wasn't about Garth Brooks's generosity, remarkable as it was. The real story was about what happened after the gift was given, how a family used their second chance to build something stronger than what they had lost, how a community rallied around the idea of systematic mutual aid, and how one act of kindness had rippled outward to create possibilities that no one had imagined when it began. 2 weeks later, the community event took place as scheduled, but with a significance that none of the original planners could have anticipated. Instead of simply celebrating anonymous giving, it became the launch of the Nashville Neighbors Network, with Garth Brooks speaking publicly for the first time about his decision to help local families in crisis. The response was overwhelming. By the end of the evening, more than 200 people had volunteered to participate in the network. Dozens of local businesses had offered to provide services at reduced rates for families in need, and several other wealthy Nashville residents had quietly approached David Richardson about making their own anonymous contributions to the cause. "I never imagined it would grow this quickly," Sarah told Rebecca as they surveyed the crowded community center. "That's the thing about kindness," Rebecca replied. "It's contagious. Once people see what's possible, they want to be part of it." Marcus's article, published the day before the event, had been picked up by national news outlets. But the focus remained on the community response rather than on Garth Brooks himself. The story was being framed as an example of what could happen when individual generosity inspired collective action. During his speech that evening, Garth was careful to redirect attention away from his role and toward the broader possibilities. What happened with the Martinez family And the other families I was able to help wasn't special because I did it, he told the assembled crowd. It was special because it worked. These families didn't just receive houses. They received hope, stability, and the foundation they needed to build better futures. But that kind of transformation shouldn't depend on random acts of celebrity charity. It should be something our community provides systematically for everyone who needs it. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Garth raised his hand to continue. The Nashville Neighbors Network that Sarah Martinez and her family have helped create represents something much more powerful than what I was able to do alone. It represents all of us taking responsibility for each other's well-being. That's not just charity. That's community. As Garth spoke, Sarah stood with her family near the front of the room, watching their mysterious benefactor transform into a public advocate for the kind of systematic support that could help countless other families. Miguel had his arm around her shoulders. Their children were paying attention with the focused intensity they reserved for truly important moments. And Rebecca stood nearby with the satisfied expression of someone whose faith in human nature had been thoroughly vindicated. When the formal presentations ended and the evening moved into the networking and planning phase, Sarah found herself in conversation with Linda Johnson, whose family had been one of the other recipients of Garth's anonymous generosity. "I still can't quite believe it," Linda said, shaking her head. "All this time, I've been listening to his music on the radio, never knowing that he was the reason my daughters and I had a home." "I know exactly what you mean," Sarah replied. "But in a way, I'm glad we didn't know until now. It gave us time to adjust, to make the house truly ours, without feeling like we were living in someone else's generosity." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "And now that we do know, we can focus on making sure other families get the same chance we did." Across the room, Marcus Williams was interviewing volunteers for a follow-up story about the community response. The evening had exceeded everyone's expectations, and the Nashville Neighbors Network was already receiving inquiries from other cities interested in replicating the model. "The thing that strikes me most," Marcus said to Tom Bradford, who had inadvertently started the whole chain of events with his casual mention of the Martinez family's struggles, "is how organic this feels. It doesn't seem forced or artificial." Tom, who had been watching the proceedings with evident satisfaction, nodded. "That's because it's built on relationships that were already here. Garth didn't create Nashville's spirit of community. He just gave it a specific focus and some resources to work with." Meanwhile, David Richardson was deep in conversation with several potential donors who were interested in contributing to the network's endowment fund. The legal and administrative structure they were creating would ensure that the network could operate sustainably while maintaining the personal, community-based approach that had made the original gifts so effective. "The key," David was explaining to a group of local business owners, "is making sure we preserve the dignity and agency of the families we help. This isn't about charity in the traditional sense. It's about providing strategic support that enables people to solve their own problems." As the evening progressed, it became clear that something significant was taking shape. The Nashville Neighbors Network wasn't just a charitable organization. It was becoming a new model for how communities could systematically support their most vulnerable members while preserving everyone's dignity and strengthening social bonds. Dr. Amanda Foster, a professor of social work at Vanderbilt University who had attended the event, approached Rebecca near the end of the evening. "I'd like to propose a partnership," Dr. Foster said. "What you're creating here could be studied, refined, and potentially replicated in communities across the country. Would you be interested in collaborating on some research?" Rebecca was intrigued. "What kind of research?" "Long-term outcome studies, analysis of what makes this model effective, development of best practices that could be shared with other communities. This could become a significant contribution to the field of community-based social services. The conversation was interrupted by Emma Martinez, who had apparently escaped from her parents' supervision and was now tugging on Rebecca's sleeve. "Miss Rebecca," Emma said, with 5-year-old urgency, "Mama says it's time to go home, but I wanted to tell you, thank you for helping us find our house." Rebecca knelt down to Emma's level. "You're very welcome, sweetheart. But you know what? Now you and your family are going to help other families find their houses too." Emma considered this seriously. "That's good. Everyone should have a nice house like ours." Out of the mouths of babes, Rebecca thought, came the most profound truths. As families began to head home and volunteers finished cleaning up, Sarah found herself standing with Garth near the community center's entrance, watching the evening wind down. "I never imagined it would turn into this," she said, gesturing toward the bustling activity of people exchanging contact information and making plans for follow-up meetings. "Neither did I," Garth admitted. "When I decided to help your family, I was thinking about one house, one situation. I never considered that it might lead to something this comprehensive. Do you regret going public? Giving up your anonymity?" Garth was quiet for a moment, watching as Miguel helped load folding chairs into the back of Tom Bradford's truck, while Carlos and Isabella gathered leftover decorations. "No," he said finally. "I think this is what was supposed to happen. Maybe the anonymity was necessary at first, to give you and the other families space to adjust, but keeping it secret forever would have limited what the gift could become." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "It's bigger than any of us now, isn't it? Much bigger. And that's exactly how it should be." As they prepared to part ways, Sarah had one final question for the man who had transformed her family's life. "What happens next? For you, I mean. Does this change how you think about using your platform and your resources?" Garth smiled, looking tired but deeply satisfied. "I think it means I need to be more intentional about the difference between charity and community building. Tonight showed me that the most powerful giving happens when it creates capacity for more giving." 3 months later, Marcus Williams published a comprehensive follow-up article about the Nashville Neighbors Network's early success. In its first quarter of operation, the network had helped 18 families avoid eviction, provided job training for 23 adults, connected 12 children with tutoring services, and facilitated more than $200,000 in community-based assistance. More importantly, exit interviews with recipient families showed that 96% felt that their dignity had been preserved throughout the process, and 87% had already found ways to contribute to helping other families in need. The Martinez family had become unofficial ambassadors for the network, with Sarah serving as volunteer coordinator and Miguel providing accessibility consulting for home modifications. Their children had started a newsletter to help network families stay connected, and Isabella had begun a pen pal program pairing children from different recipient families. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the change in how Nashville thought about poverty and community support. Rather than seeing economic crisis as a personal failing requiring charitable intervention, the network had helped the community understand it as a systemic challenge requiring collective response. Garth Brooks, meanwhile, had found himself in the unexpected role of spokesman for a new model of celebrity philanthropy, one that emphasized community building over individual charity and long-term systemic change over short-term relief. The traditional model of celebrity giving is someone famous writing a check and getting their name on a building, he said during a national television interview about the Nashville experience. But what we learned here is that the most effective giving happens when celebrities use their resources to amplify community capacity, not replace it. The interview was conducted at the Martinez family home, with Sarah, Miguel, and their children participating in the conversation. It was a deliberate choice by both Garth and the family to demonstrate that the real story wasn't about celebrity generosity, but about community resilience. Mr. Brooks gave us a house, Isabella explained to the interviewer with 9-year-old directness, but we made it into a home. And now we're helping other people make homes too. The interviewer asked Garth if he planned to replicate the Nashville model in other cities. "That's not my decision to make," Garth replied. "The Nashville Neighbors Network works because it grew out of relationships and trust that already existed in this community. Other cities will need to find their own approaches based on their own strengths and needs. But surely you could provide seed funding, help with startup costs." "I could," Garth acknowledged, "and I probably will in some cases. But the most important thing I can provide is proof that this kind of community-based support actually works. The families we've helped aren't just surviving now. They're thriving, and they're helping other families thrive too." Sarah, who had been listening to the exchange, added her own perspective. "What Garth gave us wasn't just financial help," she said. "It was proof that our community cared about us, that our struggles mattered to people we didn't even know. That's something any community can provide, regardless of whether they have a country music star to help fund it." The interview concluded with the entire Martinez family taking the camera crew on a tour of their home, showing how they had personalized the space and made it truly their own. The house that had once been a symbol of anonymous charity had become a testament to the power of community investment in individual families. In the final shot of the segment, the camera captured the family's gratitude tree, now a permanent feature in their backyard, with notes from dozens of community events and gatherings. But the newest addition wasn't a note of gratitude. It was a small sign that Isabella had made, reading, "The Nashville Neighbors Network, where everyone helps everyone." As winter turned to spring, and the one-year anniversary of the Martinez family's move approached, Sarah often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them from crisis to stability to community leadership. The anonymous gift had saved them, but the revelation of Garth's identity had empowered them. Knowing that their benefactor was a real person with real motivations and ongoing concern had transformed their gratitude from an abstract obligation into a concrete commitment to pay it forward. Miguel's handyman business was thriving, specializing in accessibility modifications and home repairs for network families. Carlos had started a youth volunteer program through his school, inspired by his family's experience. Emma had become the unofficial greeter at network events, charming donors and recipients alike with her 5-year-old enthusiasm. And Sarah had discovered a talent for nonprofit management, coordinating services and matching families with appropriate assistance with the efficiency of someone who understood both sides of the equation. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in how they understood their own story. What had once felt like a miraculous intervention by a mysterious benefactor now felt like the natural result of living in a community that valued mutual support and collective responsibility. The house was still beautiful, the financial security was still life-changing, and their gratitude to Garth Brooks was still profound. But those elements were no longer the defining features of their experience. Instead, their story had become about what happens when individual generosity catalyzes community transformation, when private charity evolves into public commitment, and when families that have been helped discover they have the power to help others. On the evening of their first anniversary in the house, the Martinez family hosted a barbecue for their neighbors, network volunteers, and the extended community that had formed around their experience. Garth Brooks was there, no longer a mysterious benefactor, but a friend and collaborator. Rebecca Thompson was there, beaming with pride at what her families had accomplished. Marcus Williams was there, still documenting the ongoing story. David Richardson was there with his wife, finally able to talk openly about the legal work he was most proud of. But the guests of honor were three new families who had recently received assistance through the Nashville Neighbors Network. Families who were just beginning their own journeys from crisis to stability to community involvement. As Sarah looked around her backyard, watching children play on the swing set that had once seemed impossibly out of reach, she realized that their story had come full circle. They had received an extraordinary gift, discovered its source, and used that knowledge to create something even more extraordinary. A sustainable system for ensuring that no family in their community would have to face crisis alone. The gratitude tree was still there, now heavy with notes from dozens of families and hundreds of volunteers. But the most recent edition, written in Miguel's careful handwriting, captured the essence of what their experience had become. For everyone who helped us, everyone we've helped, and everyone we'll help in the future, this is what community looks like when we choose to take care of each other. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be written by all the families and volunteers who had learned that individual generosity, when properly channeled, could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The gift that had changed everything had become the foundation for changing much more. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Garth Brooks found himself standing once again in the Martinez family kitchen, but this time surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a family celebration, rather than the nervous energy of a secret revelation. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked him, echoing the question Marcus had posed months earlier. Garth looked out at the backyard, where children from multiple families were playing together, where adults were making plans for the next network meeting, where Tom Bradford was teaching someone's teenager to play guitar. "Only one," he said with a smile. "I wish I could have seen this coming from the beginning. If I'd known that helping one family would lead to helping dozens of families, I might have started sooner." Sarah laughed. "I don't think it works that way. I think it had to start with one family, with one act of kindness, and then grow from there." "You're probably right," Garth agreed. "Some things can't be planned. They can only be lived." As the last guests departed and the Martinez family began cleaning up, they moved with the easy efficiency of people who had learned to work together through both crisis and celebration. The house that had once represented salvation now represented something even more powerful: the foundation for building the kind of community where salvation wouldn't be necessary, because support would always be available. The mystery was solved. The gift had been given and received and multiplied. And the story that had begun with one family's crisis had become a testament to what was possible when individual generosity inspired collective action. In Nashville, Tennessee, on a quiet street lined with oak trees, a house that had once been purchased by a country music star as an anonymous gift had become the headquarters for a network that was changing how an entire community thought about taking care of its own. And in that transformation, everyone involved, the giver, the receivers, and the community that embraced them all, had discovered that the most powerful gifts are those that create the capacity for more giving, and that the truest gratitude is expressed not in thanks, but in action. The gift that changed everything had become the gift that kept on giving, rippling outward in ways that none of them could have imagined when it all began with a simple desire to help a family in need. 2 years after the Nashville Neighbors Network was founded, Marcus Williams received a call from a producer at CNN who wanted to do a documentary about community-based philanthropy models that were being replicated across the country. "We understand that Nashville was one of the first cities to develop this approach," the producer said. we'd like to include it in our series about innovative social programs. Marcus, who had been following the network's growth and evolution, was happy to help coordinate the documentary. But when he called Sarah Martinez to discuss it, her response surprised him. "I think that's wonderful," she said. "But I hope they understand that this isn't really about Nashville anymore. It's about what's possible when communities decide to take responsibility for each other." She was right. In the 2 years since the network's founding, similar programs had been established in more than 30 cities across the United States, each adapted to local conditions and needs, but all based on the core principle that sustainable community support required systematic approach rather than random charity. Garth Brooks had provided seed funding for several of these programs, but his role had evolved from primary donor to advisor and advocate. The real work was being done by community members who understood that helping their neighbors was both a privilege and a responsibility. The Martinez family remained active in the Nashville network, but they had also become consultants to other cities, developing their own programs. Miguel's expertise in accessibility had become particularly valuable as communities recognized the importance of ensuring that support systems worked for people with disabilities. Isabella, now 11 years old, had started a national pen pal network, connecting children from families that had been helped by community support programs. Her monthly newsletter reached more than 500 families across the country. Carlos, at 12, had organized a youth volunteering initiative that paired teenagers from stable families with children from families in crisis, providing mentorship and friendship during difficult transitions. And Emma, now 7, had become something of a mascot for the movement. Her unself-conscious enthusiasm for helping others serving as a reminder that generosity was natural when it was modeled and supported. But perhaps the most significant development was that the Nashville Neighbors Network had begun to influence how the city approached social services more broadly. Rather than treating poverty, homelessness, and family crisis as separate issues requiring separate bureaucratic responses, the city had begun to coordinate services around the network's model of comprehensive, dignity-preserving support. The results were remarkable. Nashville's family homelessness rate had dropped by 60%. Job training programs had a 93% completion rate, and most tellingly, families who received network support reported feeling more connected to their community rather than more dependent on it. When the CNN documentary crew arrived to film the Nashville portion of their series, they found themselves documenting not just a successful charitable program, but a fundamental shift in how a community understood its obligations to its members. The segment opened with footage of the original Martinez family home, now occupied by another family that had been helped by the network, and included interviews with Garth Brooks, Sarah and Miguel Martinez, Rebecca Thompson, and several other families that had both received and provided support through the network. But the most powerful moment in the documentary came when the camera captured a network meeting where families were both receiving assistance and volunteering to help others. The image of former recipients serving as mentors and advocates for new participants illustrated the network's most important achievement: creating a system where being helped was the first step toward helping others. What we learned in Nashville, Garth Brooks said in his final interview for the documentary, is that the most sustainable charity is the kind that turns recipients into donors, that builds community capacity rather than individual dependency. The documentary concluded with Sarah Martinez standing in her backyard, next to the gratitude tree that had become a symbol of the network's philosophy. "People sometimes ask me if we ever feel like we owe Garth something for what he did for us," she said to the camera. "But the truth is, the debt isn't to him. It's to the community that embraced us and to the families we can help in the future. That's how generosity really works. Not as something you receive and hold on to, but as something you receive and pass forward." As the camera pulled back to show the tree heavy with notes from dozens of families, Viewers could see the latest addition, a small wooden sign that had been carved by Miguel in his workshop, planted by kindness, grown by community, nourished by hope. The gift that had changed everything had become a tree whose branches reached far beyond anything its original planters could have imagined, providing shelter and sustenance for communities across the country who had learned that taking care of each other wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the foundation of a society worth living in. And in Nashville, Tennessee, in a house that had once been an anonymous gift from a country music star, 3 children were growing up with the absolute certainty that communities existed to support their members, that generosity was both a privilege and a responsibility, and that every family's crisis was an opportunity for the entire community to demonstrate its values. The mystery had been solved. The gift had been given and received and multiplied beyond measure, and the story that had begun with one family's desperate need had become a testament to what was possible when individual kindness inspired collective commitment to the common good.